Sorry. Sure. Yeah, let's get started.
Okay, so I'm Josie from OPWDD, and today we are recording this meeting, which will be posted within a few days on our website. We are offering closed caption for those and panelists that would like to use it. If you click on the multimedia viewer that should be in your bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a blue box talking about going to an external site. Go ahead and click continue on that blue box. Then down at the bottom, you want to hit the button that says show/hide chat, at which point you should start to see the text roll. If English is not your preferred language to read in, you can go under languages and you can select. Registered, you let us know if you wanted a different language. So today we're offering English, Bengali, Chinese, Korean, and Spanish. We will be offering sign language interpreting. We are waiting for the interpreters to get on to the meeting. For that, you're going to want to look at the top of your screen to the thumbnails. You're going to want to find the one that's labeled ASL and then a person's name, and you want to pin that to your thumbnails. There should be two. They take turns about every 15 or 20 minutes. I'm done with my part.
Chris, you're muted.
Sorry, new to this. Yeah, thanks so much, everybody, for coming. I want to thank OPW for kind of putting this together at the last minute. There was a lot of kind of changes and things with the open meeting laws that we're going to address here, and the emergency order expiring starting again. And finally, at last minute, OPW was very kind to work with us to try to get this important meeting, and so I appreciate that. I also really appreciate all the people who are joining to participate and watch this committee work with OPW and try to support families through directly family support services. So thanks so much. First on the agenda, we have an update from Roger on the 507 plan.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Roger Bearden, the Executive Deputy Commissioner at OPWDD, and I just wanted to welcome everybody as well. Thank Chris for your collaboration as well in putting this together. For those who are tuning in, FSS stands for Family Support Services. So this meeting is a meeting focused on those services and supports for families. So I think the next slide, there's a title slide or something that was going to accompany my update, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, so there's the agenda in total. Chris, I don't know if you wanted to walk through that agenda just for folks, or I could do that either way.
Yeah, go ahead, Roger. Okay,
so we're going to start. I'm sorry, that's my work from home. My dog is sharing his own thoughts on the agenda. The first item is 507 plan, the strategic plan, just updating where with that. And there's some housekeeping. Sorry, Chris, why don't you do the agenda? I'm going to go.
Yeah, sure. With my dog. Yeah, so we're going to start with the discussion of the 507 plan, and Roger's going to present. After that, we are going to work on a resolution and hopefully pass a resolution that will allow us to attend meetings remotely in the future once the disaster emergency order is lifted. I see OPW is going to begin talking with us about the budget, the FSS budget. That kind of, I think, goes hand in hand with the next item on the agenda, which is the RFP process. And also within that section, we're going to hear from Counsel at OPW regarding trying to get a conflict of interest policy in place for the FSS committee, as well as perhaps a brief discussion on establishing some bylaws, which will help us govern ourselves and make decisions in the future when things come up. Following that, we're going to get an update from central office regarding the family reimbursement ADM. I believe the committee has a few questions on that as well. Finally, a statewide update and a discussion on next steps. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Roger.
Appreciate it. I think we can go to the next slide, and I hopefully have fixed my audio issues. So just a quick item there is I know that we had a fair amount of feedback As folks will know, we published back several months ago now a draft strategic plan, otherwise known as the 507 plan, which is the mental hygiene law provision that governs our planning process. And the commissioner has been doing a lot of public engagement, in-person forums, which have just recently concluded, and some virtual forums which continue. And I did mean to say at the outset that she sends her regrets. She's actually taking a vacation this week, so I'm covering this meeting for her. And part of that feedback we have heard from a number of stakeholders about the fact that we didn't mention the FSS program within the draft, and that was certainly an oversight in terms of not discussing it. There were, there's always a risk when you put out a document that you may skip over something. We do intend to address it in the final draft document, or final document, and we have benefited, I think, from a pretty substantial set of ideas that have emerged out of the stakeholder engagement. And certainly we're all ears at this committee meeting as well to see whether there are any ideas or concepts that might be worth examining. The final strategic plan would be published. The intention is by November 1 of this year, and that would lay out a framework for the next several years. Our intention then is to be providing an update in March of 23, and then a fuller update and some fuller discussions around topics that we have to talk about next summer. And so it's really not a one-time effort. The effort is to be continually planning, revising, and thinking. So we'll have the opportunity to adjust over time. So that's really what I want to say about that. I don't know if there are any questions, Chris, or other members of the committee that might have about that.
Yeah, so my question on that, Roger, would be, I'm wondering where you're at on that process. If you've begun to address the family support and how that's going to look within the 507 plan. If you have, I'm wondering if we can begin to collaborate together on it with the committee and perhaps bringing in other stakeholders. If you have not started that process, I'm wondering if the committee can join with your team at the outset to try to develop at least a framework, if not detail, of what that's going to look like in the 507.
Yeah, well, 100%. I think we're more in the first stage rather than the second, Chris. So, what we've been doing, and I believe the virtual forums continue into this coming week and maybe a little bit beyond. So right now we're in the collect, collate, analyze phase of the stakeholder feedback, acknowledging at this point, areas where, if stakeholders are saying, hey, we didn't really understand what you're doing here. It wasn't clear to us. We disagree. We think you should be doing something different. Or you missed the topic entirely, as in the case of the FSS. Really cataloging those, beginning the work of saying, okay, what do we, sounds like everybody was really pretty happy with this section, thought we were, more or less on the mark. We don't need to do a lot of substantial revision there. We can, tweak some language or so on this section. Yeah, maybe we need to actually have a section. So we're really at that phase. I would welcome the engagement of the committee. I'm going to suggest, I haven't looked at the calendar. I think we have another committee meeting kind of closely stacked to this one because of the way the calendar has laid out, that we might make that a primary discussion point at the next committee meeting, and whatever we need to do, obviously, to prepare for that in advance. Does that make sense to you, Chris, and the other members of the committee?
I mean, that makes sense. I appreciate recognition of FSS and the 507 plan. It's very important. And I'm really glad to hear that. I can reach out to you, early next week, Roger, and maybe we can start to talk about how we can begin to engage on this to try to make it most efficient and most effective. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, 100%. And it's also going to benefit from the conversation we have here, because obviously there's some things that we need to talk about here in terms of, as you mentioned, the budget, the RFP, plans going forward. So a lot of those are items that are, going to be part of what we, end up shaping in terms of, the recommendations and the strategies moving forward.
Absolutely. The work starts here. Great. Any other members? Do they have comments, questions that they'd like to bring up on this? Not seeing hands.
And for the attendees, just so you know, we can see the chat. So I do see the comment that was shared, and thank you to the person who was sharing the information about the Spanish language session that's coming up on August 18th. So one of the things we have been trying to do is make sure that we are addressing people in their preferred languages when we're doing these engagements so we can get the best information we can. So appreciate that shout out.
Great. Okay, if there's nothing else on 507 update.
I raised my hand.
Oh, sorry, Deb. I'm not seeing. How do I see? Oh,
Okay.
here we go.
Yeah, see? Now take it. Okay. First of all, I wanted to say, Roger, thank you very much for acknowledging that there was an oversight by not putting the FSS committee on the statewide and the local 19 councils, because in the past, and I've been on and coming up since we had previous our Commissioner Tom Moll, and I did put my feelings across that I was very hurt and disappointed. So I'm glad that you're willing to have that work on it to talk about the family support service programs, because we do have to keep providing information, and we do need to all work together. So thank you for that.
Welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, Deb. Anyone else? I'm not seeing any hands in the list. Okay, great. Thanks again, Roger. We appreciate that. The next item on the agenda is an open meeting law resolution. I believe back in April, in early April, open meeting law, the Committee on Open Meeting made some changes to open meeting law that are going to affect all public bodies who meet once the emergency disaster order or the disaster emergency order is lifted. The reason that we're able to meet virtually today is because of the disaster emergency order by the governor, setting aside some of these rules that govern public meetings. They did again, work on some changes in April that became effective June for when there is no longer an emergency order in place. To kind of just quickly summarize those, they are going to allow for video participation by members of the committees within the public meetings. However, they are requesting or mandating that we pass a resolution stating that our committee would like to allow members to attend virtually as well. So that is basically the body of this particular resolution. One of the caveats to that virtual attendance is that if that person attending virtually is not also in an area where the general public can also attend that meeting, that they will not count towards a quorum. So different than now when we can meet under the emergency order and have a quorum virtually, that's not going to be allowable once the emergency order is eventually lifted. And we will need to get a quorum in physical locations or locations in order to be able to proceed with meetings. I think, and that's kind of the second step in this process. I think, Roger, you talked about that a little bit yesterday, about trying to set up a situation where we can, put together that kind of hybrid meeting. So I think that the easiest thing to do for me would just be to run through this resolution really quickly, ask council if they have anything to add, and if the members have any questions for council, we can address those, and then we'll take a vote. It just says, whereas passing Chapter 56 of the laws of 2022, the New York State Legislature amended Section 103 of the Open Meeting Law, and whereas Chapter 56 of the Open Meeting Law permitting Family Support Services Committee to authorize its members to attend meetings by video conferencing under extraordinary circumstances. And whereas Section 103 requires the FS Committee to adopt a resolution for itself following a public hearing today, authorizing the limited use of video conferencing under such circumstances, and whereas Section 103 allows for hybrid meetings by requiring, quote, that a minimum number of members are present to fulfill the public body's quorum requirement in the same physical location or locations where the public can attend. And for this particular body, that's 10 members of our 19. Whereas in accordance with Section 103, any members attending by video conference must, except during the executive session, be heard, seen, and identified while the meeting is being conducted, including but not limited to any motions, proposals, resolutions, and any other matter formally discussed or voted upon. And whereas Section 103 requires that any meeting where a member attends by video conferencing be recorded, posted to the FSS committee webpage within 5 business days and transcribed upon request. And finally, whereas Section 103 requires that members of the public be permitted to attend, participate, if authorized, in any meeting by video conference when a member of the FSS committee attends by video conference. So then be it resolved that the FSS committee authorizes its members who experience an extraordinary circumstance as described above and further defined in any rules or written procedures later adopted to attend meetings by video conference. 1, as long as a quorum of the members attend in person at one or more locations open to the public. 2, as long as the member can be seen, heard, and identified while the open portion of the meeting is being conducted. And 3, as otherwise permitted under Chapter 56 of the Laws of 22. And be it further resolved that the FSS committee shall create written procedures further governing its use of video conferencing by its members in compliance with Chapter 56 of the Laws of 2022. And those procedures have been drafted and shared with the committee as well. So we should be in good shape there. So Mary Beth, does that cover everything I need to cover?
Sounds good, Chris.
Great, thank you so much. Do any of the members of the committee have any questions whatsoever?
Chris, just for ease, since this may be viewed later, Mary Beth Babcock is a deputy counsel in the OPWDD's counsel's office. Just information for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Thanks. Are there any questions from the committee?
Hi, this is Tina. I just wanted to find out, does this mean that if I cannot attend a meeting, that I need to do it in an open spot, like as if we're saying, if I can't come, I can't do it at home. I need to do it like in the DDRO or something where it's open to other people. Is that how it means?
The way it is now, Tina, you can meet in a private location, okay? But to be counted towards the quorum, you need to be in a public location where other members of the public can attend. And at this point, I'm not sure if we've established those facilities yet, or if there's, a network that we can begin to develop and tap into. That's, the final solution, right, is to be able to both attend remotely when you need to and count towards the quorum. So this is just the first step to that, is our requirement to authorize our members to attend virtually under, of course, those extraordinary circumstances.
This is Debbie. I have a question too. In reference to, I'm going to piggyback on what Tina said. So say we, either her or I, cannot make it up to Albany, and we can't do it, say, at the DDRO, but say we can do it in a senior center or a library and have members from the public. Is that going to be allowed?
Chris, why don't I speak to that, because I think it's more operations.
That's a little bit beyond where I want to go.
So as we understand the law, there needs to be a quorum of the committee members total in a publicly open location. And so that's going to be something that where we, the public can freely circulate. So, when we've met in Empire State Plaza, that's a location that is publicly available. The challenge we have, and we don't have sound answers to this point, is other publicly available locations in the state, and then making sure that the technology can connect to these, so that somebody who's, say, sitting in a location in New York City that may be publicly available, how do we connect that technologically to the location in Albany, and also have that connected to people who may be linking into their home? We don't have that fully worked out yet. These are new requirements that came into place, and we're working through the technological aspects. Right now, unless we adopt a resolution, as I understand it, we cannot allow anybody to participate beyond the emergency remotely in any fashion, that everybody would have to be in the same physical location. Or so this is sort of as Chris is saying, the first step. We are working on it. This is not the only committee that we have that is subject to the open meetings law. So we've been working on some technological solutions, and as we've tried it in a couple of other meetings, we've run into some roadblocks with the compatibility of different types of equipment. So that's something we're working on. So I wish I had a more concrete answer to you, but it's something that we'd be working on. But this is sort of the first step to get to where I think we'd like to be with a kind of a hybrid meeting structure, if we can get there.
have a question. This is Kathy Nowak. I understand that it's going to take a while. Going back when we used to meet in the commissioner's conference room, oftentimes a family member couldn't attend and would go to their local DDRO and would connect between the 44 Holland and the DDRO. So the capability, unless you pulled it out, is still at those DDROs, DDSOs.
Yeah, that capability is there. The unfortunate thing is that neither the Commissioner's Conference Room nor our DDROs are publicly available locations. So we have a closed.
But they are
Yeah.
publicly available. I mean, they could be. A
This is
conference room
Josie.
in the,
I just want to interject and say that that ability is not there anymore because we now also host the meetings virtual, and those cameras can't connect to WebEx. They
okay,
conference room to conference
Oh.
room, but they can't connect to the internet. New York State is working on it, but they don't know what the issue is to fix it, so we don't know when that's going to be fixed. So for right now, that's not even an option.
thank you.
Thank you, Josie.
My only feeling that I think that came out of this virtual world was we have a total of 204 participants right now. And by limiting this to only Albany, many of the people who are able to participate now can't participate because they can't run up to Albany for 3 hours.
We're going to keep it on the internet also. It's just members of the committee need to be in Albany. We're still going to,
Okay.
we are
All
now.
right,
Everyone can still see it. We'll still have closed captioning. We'll still have sign language interpreting. It's
okay,
just, we need
perfect.
the physical members in a physical spot together.
That's great, and I'm glad you clarified that. Thank you.
Right, yes, because
Mary Fasano, along the same lines, are you also going to make it easier for the members of the committee to get to Albany, to get reimbursement, without having to go through hoops?
I think we could probably address that offline. I'm not, I mean, the rules around reimbursement are ones that are given to us by state finance law and the comptroller and so on. So, we can certainly look at that process, but I think maybe we should just talk about that offline in the interest of, we do have the agenda. I just don't know what the rules are, and I don't know what the recommendations are, but we'd certainly look at anything that folks would be amenable. So, Mary Beth, can I ask you if there's no further questions? Is there this is the first time I think this committee's actually been called upon to adopt a resolution. So I'd like us to try to do it in a way that meets the requirements of the law. I don't know if you want to let Chris know how to call the question.
I think it's just a matter of calling the question second and asking if there's no objections, just a unanimous vote of the committee would suffice.
So I would, in addressing the committee, I would like to, that we approve a resolution to allow for video conferencing that's just been shared. And if, I ask you if there's any objections to that.
No. You need a second. Deborah Greif, will second that motion.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We do it, voice?
Aye.
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 All opposed?
Aye.
Is anyone opposed? And we have a quorum, and I believe the motion passes. We good, Mary Beth?
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Mary Beth. So Josie, I think we can advance the slides now. Alexis or Kevin?
This one's mine. Me, Christine, and Craig. So good afternoon, everybody. Kevin Valentis, I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Fiscal and Policy Management. And wanted to talk a little bit. I know we've had several conversations about the, the amount of, I'm just going to say, underperforming or underutilized contracts that have been either surrendered or terminated over the last few years, and what the FSS councils would have access to reallocate funds to support, additional supports and services. So, we've gone back and identified approximately $3.5 million in funding that, we'll make available for the FSS committees to reprocure supports and services to address regional needs. This was, pretty, arduous process, as a contract may have multiple purposes in FSS. And so we took, some analytic effort here to make sure that we had something greater than the $1 million, I think, that we had talked about maybe a year ago now, and are pretty confident that the $3.5 million in additional, resources are really representative of some of the changes that have occurred over the last few years. I just want to, note, though, that these funds will be distributed to regions using an identifiable and consistent metric. And that metric, we've talked about internally is the number of people who are enrolled in tabs who do not have a corresponding enrollment in a certified residential program, nor do they receive a housing subsidy. So really trying to simply put, we are going to allocate to the regions based on the number of people who are living at home, right, which is really the intent of the family support dollars. And it allows it, for a more equitable allocation of state funds to meet the needs of the people that we all collectively support. I do want to highlight that we don't have those regional distribution numbers at this point. We took some time to identify what we felt was a fair and equitable distribution methodology, and want to make sure that the data that we're pulling to identify that distribution metric would be, is accurate. This is something that we, is kind of a new spin on how we look at some of our tabs data. And so we'll be following up with the regional distribution of that $3.5 million in the coming weeks. Any questions?
So I guess my first question, Kevin, would be, can you give us some, understanding of how you found or arrived at that $3.5 million figure? My sense from talking with the committee that the number that we were thinking about, while we don't have those exact numbers in all locations, would have been kind of a higher number than that. And I'm also wondering if that number includes any changes that might have come about as a result of the implementation of the ADM with programs walking away from family reimbursement.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly, specific, program changes, but I can say that we've looked at, and I want to be clear about this because I think since I've come to this agency in 2013, I've been clear that our budget isn't based on really appropriations, right? The guiding metric is cash spending. And, when we took a look at, some of the contracts that were sunset or surrendered or terminated over the last several years, we also overlaid on that with, changes in spending, not only for the agency, but also in family support services. So from our perspective, right, what happened last year is what this budget assumes we could support. And this $3.5 million is where we feel comfortable that we can exceed that. Again, whatever contract liability may be out there, we're beholden in essence to the cash that supports those contracts, which are functions of the appropriations or the authority to spend money. And so what we've looked at is this 3.5 is a number that we have some degree of confidence that we can sustain going forward. I mean, for those of you who, had the joy, I guess, of listening to my budget briefings more recently, right, there was a need to really look at and examine, state funds, not this fiscal year, but in prior fiscal years, to look at how state-only funds were being used and why, what options do we have to leverage efficiencies, right? Under the previous administration, we were always looking to help keep state spending within a certain percentage growth year to year. And that, in many cases, required us to take a look at state-only dollars and opportunities to identify efficiencies therein, right? So this $3.5 million, in essence, commitment of resources, which we believe we have the cash to support, will kind of fly in the face of what the financial plan has assumed over the last several years in terms of the need to reduce 100% state spending as opposed to grow it.
Okay, so I guess I'm taking away from that the 3.5 is what OPW feels that they can support. It is certainly a meaningful number. It may not be the number that we were thinking about, but it's something that we can look at as a real number and depend on it going forward.
Correct.
Okay,
that's a good summary.
Great.
Maybe I should have you write my summaries.
Happy to, Kevin. So I see some hands are up. Gail, was your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I truly understood the second bullet and what that means. Does that mean all funds that have been accrued or accounted for, however you want to say it, in your cash dollars, are not necessarily going back to the region of where they originated from, but they are going to be put back in a pot and it's going to be reassessed throughout the state as to where that need for that those dollars should go? Or is it going back to the original regions?
No, I think what we don't have any documentation to understand the methodology of how each region had gotten the allocation that it had, right? So what we're trying to do is come up with a way to ensure equity and access to what are, limited resources, right? Most of our budget leverages Medicaid assistance, right? So for every dollar we spend, we basically get an extra $2 in federal funding. In this area, for every dollar we spend, the dollar liability is wholly incumbent on the state. So what we're trying to do here is be responsive to the request for additional resources to further address the needs of families outside of Medicaid. And the metric that we felt as if that would be an equitable and fair distribution of these dollars, which haven't, gone anywhere, would be to look at each region's count of people who live at home and then use that as a metric to help allocate those resources back, right? And that makes sense from our perspective because that's the population that the FSS dollars are intended to support.
So other available resources in the region are not considered. It's not to fill gaps in services. It's now everybody gets the same slice of the pie. Is that the new way of looking at dollar distribution?
For this 3.5 million, that's how we're redistributing it. We're not redistributing the base dollars that each council already has.
Do you have any sense of any disparity between the way it used to be and the way it's going to be? If there's any kind of redistribution of those allocations across different regions, is some are going to go up or some are going to go down? Is there any sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think, clearly there will be some, some ups and downs, right? And we'll be able to share that with you once we have the final, certainty of the data about the number of people that we have living at home. That's something we're going through and scrubbing right now to make sure it's accurate. And we can share that, separately with you all about how those funds would be, would be redistributed.
And Chris, if I could, and Kevin, I think you kind of elided the point, but Kevin, I think it's worth emphasis, which is that, the historical allocation patterns, we really can't find what the rationale was, and so to kind of replicate those patterns, it seems so the best proxy for need would be, the number of people in the situation. And since these funds are supposed to support people living at home, to look at, and families who are supporting those people, that would be a reasonable way to allocate the funds.
Is there ever going to be a reassessment based on gaps in services? Because my understanding was that was one of the main functions of FSS. I'm just trying to understand where that landed.
Yeah, well, I don't know that we really have any data to inform that at this point. And I think that that's something that we could certainly look to the committee to help. If you start with a baseline, kind of an equity baseline, which is to say, how many folks are in different, geographical areas who meet the base criteria, which is that, that you're living at home, that you're not someone who's in the, in a certified residence. I think we could definitely take a look at, adjustments up or down from that baseline over time, depending upon, whether there's some information available. But I'm not aware of any information that would say Region X is 20% more needy in this area than Region Y that would allow us to make that adjustment at this point. It's something that we looked at and we looked for, but we're just not aware of anything that would cause a deviation from sort of a baseline equitable distribution.
Maria, your hand is up.
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions. One question had to do with timeline on which this 3.5 million is based. Up to what point in time? Because we know that there have been situations where in our area, I'm from Westchester, we've just recently lost someone due to the new ADM. We've recently lost a provider. So half of that contract that was supposed to be spent for the rest of this year obviously is not going to be spent. So at what point did you, what range of dates are we talking about of the 3.5 million? What does that represent? 1 year, 2 year?
I would say it represents at least the last several years, probably a year prior to the pandemic up through, it's not going to be through today. So if a vendor surrendered their contract today or last week, that wasn't the data that we looked at. We looked at, readily available annual information. So I would say through the period as late as 3/31/2022.
3/31/2022. So one could assume that anybody who dropped their contract after that would not be in this pot.
They would not be identified in the 3.5 million at this point, correct?
Okay. And then the other question I had to do with identifying the baseline. I'm not clear what baseline, how you're identifying each region's current baseline.
Baseline in terms of the existing FSS monies, I think that's the question that Roger, more clearly addressed than I did. We have no idea how those amounts were arrived at for each region, right? So what we're saying is those baselines, if you will, are going to stay flat. Whatever is out there for, contracts today, it'll stay there. And what we're proposing to do here is to redistribute it, this 3.5 million, which is a net add, right? Net increase in spending in contract authority from where we are today, based on, what we feel is a representative indication of need, which are those numbers, those individuals who live at home and are the, targeted cohorts of folks to benefit from the FSS monies.
Did you, when you were looking at these numbers, see a dip in spend during the pandemic? I would imagine you would. I would imagine that would skew your results somewhat, no?
Well, that's what I tried to, indicate and discuss earlier, that just because there was a dip in spending doesn't mean that there's a right to keep spending at the previous levels, right? So what we've done is each budget is kind of based off of the prior year assumptions. There isn't, a lot of kind of opportunities for growth. So when we look at a flat budget year to year, we were able to, and we feel like we can accomplish this 3.5 million increase in spending within the resources that we have made available to OPWD through the budget process. All right, the budget is based on cash, not based on, flat appropriations that the legislature acts on. It's like, the checks we get home every week, from our jobs are what we have to live on, not a commitment of those gross wages, which are kind of pre-tax, right? So we have to, kind of make ends meet within those cash resources we have.
Thank you.
So my question, Kevin, is when we look at contracts and when we were RFPing in the past, we would look at annual cost of a contract, right? So I guess an important question for me is this $3.5 million you're identifying to put back into the system of FSS after a 3-year moratorium and many programs closing. Is this $3.5 million annual contracts, or is this the total value of the contracts that we're going to start? Because these contracts are 5-year. So that's a huge difference in the amount of funding.
Yep, it's annual, right? I mean, I'll Christine, Craig, I mean, I think if you can chime in, I think the answer is this is an annual add, right? So it's not 3.5 plus 3.5 plus 3.5 in the next year. We're saying that over the next, whatever, 5-year term, 3.5 times 5 is what we're willing to spend and commit to over the next 5 years.
Okay.
That's correct, Kevin.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Are there any other questions on the numbers? Mary Fasano? Mary, your hand's up? You may be muted.
Yeah, here I am.
Okay.
I'm just trying to get my head around this. If Region A had a certain amount of money allocated to it 5-6 years ago, and then some agencies had to turn back that money. And now under this plan, even though this so-called region was should get a certain amount of money, it's now not going to get that amount of money. So I don't understand why regions have to lose money. I maybe I'm being too simplistic, but to me it's a loss, and I don't see how there's been a lot of council input into any of these decisions. I find it very upsetting.
Yep, I mean, I think you're right. There may be, in your example, if Region A had a historic, undocumented rationale for the amount of money it had, right, that may change under this proposal. In fact, Region A might get more money under this proposal because Region B might, have less people than what would justify its, percentage allocation of FSS dollars in totality. But, again, the goal of the FSS dollars, right, are to support people living at home, and that's what we feel is a good distribution metric to allocate those funds back. We're not changing the base dollars, but we're changing, how, we're not necessarily just giving the money back to each of the regions that suspended the contracts under this proposal. The way this would work is it would be, we're looking at the total 3.5, and region, A might have, 25% of the total statewide population of people living at home, so they get 25% of the 3.5 million. Maybe they had 30% of total contracts, right? But that, that's the distribution methodology. So by definition, that means that some regions will be giving dollars to other regions as we go through this. But again, we're trying to use an equitable manner to reallocate those funds.
And the committee will continue to advocate to do more to support families. So that's certainly not off the table as well. We can continue that outreach. We don't necessarily, have to just say, okay, 3.5 and our work is done. There's more work to be done, and that's, I think, going to be accomplished through advocacy and outreach and really getting support of stakeholders behind us. So we don't have to stop here.
And Chris, there's a comment in the chat, and I think it's who's going Margaret. We're gonna we're not dictating how these funds would be used, right? So this will be up to the regional regional folks to determine the use of those monies. But we are just saying that here's your slice of the pie, so to speak. Use it as you see fit.
So that's more the traditional historical context of the FSS that we've really been trying to return to. We feel like we strayed a little bit from that and wanting to return, because that's part of the heart and soul of FSS and the power that we bring to the table, and our unique proposition is our ability to target those services based on regional and local needs. It's a very important facet. So I'm very glad to hear that from you.
I have a question.
I
have a question. You're distributing it by region, not by each council? Yes?
Yeah, we're looking at, within the DDRO, right, we can refine it out by, DDSO. So I think that would be more representative of the council level. So that's something that we can look at. we're pulling the data at that level. I mean, I think, you know, from our global perspective, we've never embraced the non-DDSO approach to operations. So we've been looking at it based on RO, but again, that's something that can be further refined out by each of the comprising SOs, DDSO.
Well, you know, historically, when we did get the money, it was by the Family Support Council. And at that time, the needs, the priorities were developed at that local council. Then it moved to regionalized priorities. And that's something we really have to talk about when we get to that step, because in our region, 5 boroughs, what Manhattan needs is not what Staten Island needs. And we always had to come up and compromise on what the priority would be. And I hope you really look into that. I don't know how the other regions, how big they are, what they cover, but I'm certain that many of the regions have, the local councils have differing priorities. So please consider that when you get to that step, Roger.
Yeah, and can I just, sorry,
Go ahead, Roger. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of things. I've just scrolled through the chat, and there's a couple of comments that I think, you know, we could address in sort of globally. And to the point of the relationship between sort of statewide priorities and local priorities, and then which level of local, I think, you know, well, certainly we're looking, you know, generally the program. This answers a couple of questions in the chat about, you know, what about self-directed services? What about some other elements of support? These are really about programs supporting people living at home with non-Medicaid dollars. It's outside of the kinds of Medicaid services somebody may receive. So it's really about filling those gaps. And I think somebody articulated it well on the committee. I'm sorry, I forget who it was. So I think, you know, from a statewide perspective, the goal would be to define some, you know, the general parameters of the program, and then to be able to use, you know, use at some level of locality, you know, to you know, obviously if the local says we want to use this to not support families, that would be something that would be excluded from the, you know, from the potential investment. So that's really where I think we're going with it. I think we can, as Kevin said, you know, look at what the appropriate level would be, and then, you know, subject to some of the conversation we're going to be having in just a few minutes with Counsel, you know, the RFP process, you know, on a local level, you know, will be invoked, I guess, you know, to solicit specific proposals. We have done some work looking at the process that has existed to date, and some need to improve that from a legal compliance perspective. So there's a couple of elements of change there. I mean, the substance of what we're trying to do, which is, you know, fill gaps in the service system to address the needs of people, will not change. I hope I addressed some of the comments in the chat room, because there are a few that were there.
Any additional questions on the budget? I see Ann and Maria, your hands are up. Ann?
Yes. I think, Roger, you mentioned that you're looking at the numbers of individuals. That's how you're collecting the data across the state that need services. As you know, we're not all created equal, and different families or different individuals may have greater needs than others, and even the families that support them. So I was wondering how that might kind of come into the picture at looking at supporting families.
Yeah, well, it's true that each family is individual, each person is individual, right? But the question would be, is there an aggregate difference between the 20,000 people living in a particular region and the 20,000 people living in a different region that would say Region A should get 20% more than Region B because people in Region A are 20% more, there are 20% more gaps, or there's 20% more need in Region A than Region B. And I think, as to the point, I think it was with Gail that we were talking about, we really don't have any information that would suggest that variance. I think if over time we had some way to be able to project that, we could look at adjustments to sort of a core, a methodology, which is how many people in the relevant category, which is living at home, are there in that region, and allocating accordingly. So I agree with you, but it's sort of an aggregate versus an individual analysis.
Okay, thank you.
And Roger, OPW will, is committed to trying to develop that data set so that we can continue to try to dial this program in.
I'm sorry, I just couldn't understand the question. Could you say it again?
I'm sorry, that data set that allows us to refine a little bit more. We're bringing in not only the population statistic, but we're bringing in maybe the level of need statistic and kind of combining that data set. Is that something?
Right, and I would definitely welcome our regional office team, Abiba and Alexis, to kind of supply anything here. But I don't think we have any data set that would tell that today. But if there's some way to think about that in the future, I think that we would contemplate it. But I don't know of a metric that would because if you're giving Region A 20% more and giving Region B 20% less, you should have some rationale for doing that as well, right? Because you're not only
Absolutely, you'd want to understand the data for sure. Anything else, Ann?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. Maria?
Yeah, I just had one more comment. So hypothetically, if a region like ours, which has already lost 1.1 million, and probably will not get, that back in this current distribution that is being talked about, it is possible that we will continue to have unserved needs, in that we currently have those unserved needs. So if we were to lose funding, we would not be able to, or at least if you were to redistribute and we wouldn't be able to get that amount back, we would not be able to fund those needs. I mean, we have no crisis in our area that is currently being funded by FS dollars. And we had hoped to have that. We've been working on it for 5 years. And with this current redistribution of the 3.5 million, I'm guessing we're not going to get it in the future.
So I'm not sure that, go ahead, Kevin.
I was just going to say, I mean, we're still working on the allocations, right? So everything we're kind of talking about is speculative as to where the money's going to go. So, I think part of it might, ease everyone's concerns or not when we send out the regional distribution. I mean, I think if that's a helpful next step, I think that's what we all want to kind of get to here.
I'm glad that you said that, Kevin, and that this conversation is being heard and maybe considered, because there are major differences throughout the state, different challenges in different areas, certainly. And sometimes in our most rural areas, we really don't have options of even one provider. So that's what we often go back to and look to hopefully be able to do with FSS dollars when they're able to be reallocated, is try to find those gaps. And specifically in an area like a rural upstate New York area, transportation, that's a huge need. Somebody mentioned that in the chat, and they're absolutely spot on. So with the inability to access those funds, the option of us trying to overcome that major challenge in these communities is kind of off the table. So I'm really glad that you said that, these conversations will be considered, that you guys are in the process. That's that's hopeful. And I do hope that you guys, I know this is not easy and you're never going to be able to make everybody happy. Totally get that. But recognizing some of the, the gaps in the areas would be very helpful when those considerations are made.
Absolutely. Chris, could I make a suggestion that we move on to the next slide in the interest of time?
Sure. Yeah, we're ready to move to the RFP.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, just I'm looking at in the chat room. I want to be crystal clear, because I know it's a sort of a one-way communication, because it's chat among the panelists and there's other attendees. There's two different questions. There's a question of monies allocated, and then the question of how the region makes a determination as to where that money would be spent. So, to the comments that are saying, well, there's different needs in different communities, absolutely, that's the whole purpose of this regionalized process. what we've talked about up to now would be, X, 500,000 to this, 500,000 to this, $1 million to that, whatever the breakdown is that Kevin and his team come up with. And then within that, there would be an RFP process to, first of all, define the scope of what that RFP would look like in terms of, what the goal of in a particular region was. So if a goal was to achieve transportation outcomes in one region and crisis, to take the point of the other speaker, in a different, in a different region, those would be identified and ratified by, through the local process, and then, an RFP issued to identify, a provider or vendor that would, provide that service. So I just would say it's meaningful, to, at least in my own mind, to distinguish between how much money and how you divide that amongst regions and what the region chooses to do with that money. So I don't know if that's helpful. Chris, I think we're gonna talk a little bit with the councils and talk a little bit about some of the elements of, as we engage in these RFPs, and need to shore up some of our ethics and recusal policies.
Sure, that makes sense. If I could take 1 minute just to kind of, for the participants who aren't familiar with the RFP process, or at least how it's happened historically, I just want to give, 2 very short paragraphs that, I've used many times before. So this is the RFP process, okay? Local advisory councils, there's 19 local advisory councils. Each of them has a statewide representative who sits on this committee. Local advisory councils, in conjunction with their respective regional offices and local stakeholders, identified unmet needs across a wide variety of service categories. Proposals to meet these needs are requested, reviewed, and preliminarily approved at the local level. These proposals are then forwarded to OPW's central office for final review. Now, the councils oversee these programs in a number of ways, including annual reviews and site visits, in an effort to ensure accountability. Local councils can make recommendations to reduce or close programs that are underperforming or no longer needed, thus freeing funds to support unmet and changing needs of family they serve, which is the RFP process. When those allocated dollars become available again, and we have a large enough pool to then go out and identify some unmet need, we send out to our local agencies. They come back with proposals to meet those needs based on their locally available resources, and then the councils go through a process of interviewing and determining, what to move forward on. So that's the general overview, I think, of how it's been going. So Mary Beth, then?
Sure, Chris, thank you. And thank you for letting me join your meeting. I'm going to put on my ethics officer hat for a moment, and that's what this next few slides are involving. Because FS members are considered per diem officers, we are subject to the conflict of interest rules in the public officers law. And those rules require recusal by committee members where there exists a conflict between your personal interests and roles versus your roles and duties as members of the committee. And so this next few slides just set out a procedure and policy for people in order to recuse themselves when necessary. And I just wanted to go through, and if we can move the slides. I'm not sure who's controlling those. So anyway, this next slide, we're talking about what members are expected regarding the ethics rules for per diem officers. And they're not really anything outlandish. They're kind of common sense. They're asking you to avoid actual or any appearance of potential conflicts of interest where your personal interests, either financial or otherwise, might interfere with your duties as an FSS committee member. And it's to try to avoid the showing to the public, since you are a public body, that you're not favoring a particular entity or even a family member. Can we have the next slide, please? And so what we're asking members to do is disclose any conflicts that they see. And you may not be aware of them at the moment. It may not be something that you can disclose right now, but it's something that may pop up when you see a particular matter come before your committee. May I have the next slide, please? So what is a conflict? These are pretty common sense. You want to make sure that you are can discharge your committee member duties. Some of the things that might create a conflict are your employment, fiduciary or income sources, something, a member about their relative, a coworker, a business involvement. Those are all things that could create a conflict of interest when you're making a determination through that RFP process. And the next slide, please. So in order to avoid those kinds of conflicts under the Public Officers Law, we ask that people would disclose or an existing conflict that they see that might affect their duties as a member of the FSS committee. We have the next slide. So what disclosure is one thing, but the second part would be to recuse yourself. So if there's something that would be a conflict, you need to recuse yourself. And that it's not just saying you're not going to vote on a particular matter, it's staying away from the process altogether. And you should inform the chair as soon as possible, but clearly before any meeting involving that subject of the conflict. If you would let Chris know, that would be helpful. So he has an advance of the meeting in order to take care of that. And the next slide, please. So these are the rules. If you recuse yourself, you're going to remove yourself from that portion of the meeting. You will not get any more information on that particular matter. This requires redacted minutes. However, if it's a public meeting, obviously those minutes will not be redacted. And again, it allows, if the chair feels the need to recuse themselves, a vice chair or some other officer could conduct the meeting. And the next slide, please. So what we're proposing is an acknowledgement of the conflict policy that, and we make sure that members get it. You've read it, you understand it, that if there is a conflict, I'll let the chair know. And that's just, this is just an acknowledgement of the policy itself. Can I have the next slide, please? And this is the actual declaration of a conflict. So if you know something that could be potentially a conflict, you would disclose it here so that the chair will know that if there's a particular issue that comes up, you will disqualify yourself from being part of that consideration process. And again, with the understanding that sometimes conflicts arise throughout the course of a year, and at that point, you would make that disclosure and that recusal. And I don't know if anybody has any questions on this public officer policy.
Before you get to questions, just to be clear, we're talking about the FSS statewide committee and then also the local. When we talked, and Chris, you discussed previously, you know, the activities of the 19 local councils, which are known obviously to all the council members, but may not be known to those who may be watching this meeting. That the same kind of conflicts of interest provisions and declarations would apply locally to each of the committees. So, if I'm not mistaken, is that correct, Mary Beth?
That's correct. Thank you, Roger. Any questions?
When are we trying to get all this in place, Mary Beth?
I'm sorry? I didn't hear your question, Chris.
When are we trying to get all these declarations and forms filled out and signed into you?
So ideally,
Chris,
I'm sorry. Go ahead,
Go ahead, Mary. So I think what we're going to do is, the reason. You go ahead, Mary Beth. This is the lag we have when we're doing virtual meetings. You go ahead, Mary Beth.
It's fine. I just think as people become members, so if we have a new member of your committee at that time, and then annually, probably at the first meeting of the year, we have these forms available for people to complete to the best of their ability, and then keep them in the commissioner's office, I believe is what we've got in the policy where they be kept. I'm sorry, Roger, go ahead.
Yeah, and so I think what we're hoping to do here is, and first of all, to kind of make this known, obviously before initiating it, but we'll need to work out, because we'll need to get it to all of you, but also work with each of you as the head of a local committee to make sure that the members of the local committee also complete this and put together a system for that. So we're gonna need to work a little bit on the mechanics. Certainly, we want to get this done in the linkage here between obviously the new monies being available and the RFP. As folks know, the members of the local committee do play a role in reviewing, proposals, and have played a role in reviewing proposals. So it's very important that we have in place the appropriate conflict of interest provision, so that somebody wouldn't be, say, reviewing a proposal that they may have some kind of material interest or conflict in. So it's really an element of housekeeping. So I think if we get this done over the next couple of months, then we can probably be in good stead, and then kind of establish a rhythm going forward. And for context here, we did something similar with our Developmental Disabilities Advisory Council recently, and the conflict of interest policies and the conflict of interest and the recusal forms are, I believe, identical, with the exception of a different name of a committee on top. So so we have some precedent here.
They are, and also, if anyone has any questions or concerns about what might be a conflict or whether they should recuse themselves, please reach out to me. I'm happy to discuss the issue with you at any time. You can reach me through Counsel.
I just have one, I don't understand one piece here. So the conflict of interest declaration, if I am a committee member and I'm a family, I would go under family member, and the following list of organizations, blah, blah, blah. So does that mean if someone in my family is receiving services from a particular agency, I should list that?
I guess I would have to know a little bit more about the particular issue, but I'm assuming other people are also receiving from that same provider. So you're on the committee as a family member, correct?
Right. Yes. So
Can I make a recommendation
that would
maybe
apply
a specific
to almost
ethics
everybody
consultant?
on any of these committees? I'm very confused here. Is that a conflict of interest? But yet, to be on the committee, you have to either have a family member receiving services, be a person receiving services, or interested in person receiving services. This doesn't compute in my mind.
I think the point that, I'm sorry, Roger, of the public officers law would certainly, I think they understand through ethics that people on this committee are there for a particular reason. You are a family member, you are an advocate, and that's not a reason for recusing yourself. It's much more of looking at a particular service just for your own family member. If you're looking at I'm sorry, Roger, go ahead.
I think it's meant to guard against, and we can work out on the particulars, but if you are a beneficiary of a particular agency's programs or an employee of that agency, and that agency is bidding on a contract, you would not be in a position to be opining upon whether that agency should get that project. That would be a conflict of interest because you have an interest in that particular agency getting that
Roger,
contract.
in some instances, on some councils, that could eliminate everybody on the council, because everybody on that council could be getting services from agency ABC. Let's be practical here.
Well, why don't we can take a look at that. I mean, I don't know that there's an exception necessarily to the conflicts of interest in the ethics law that would allow for people to do that, but it's something we can take a look at. Our intention here is to bring ourselves into legal compliance. So I think we need to work that through.
I think there's a difference between, if a person is an employee of a particular agency, and receives a monetary, benefit from it. To me, that's much clearer than if my family member is receiving services from that. And I think that the two are very different.
Yeah, and it's a great question, Mary, and I don't want to give an answer that is wrong, so I can acknowledge it as a great question, and we should think about it. That's the whole point of talking about this
And
before.
also, you have to consider if you're on the board of the agencies. You're talking about people who have committed years and years of service and advocacy. Don't forget that piece. And in order to be on this Family Support Council, to be a member of the Board of Visitors, you don't just come out of the woods for that. You've done years and years of work of advocacy. So there's a real problem here.
Well, why don't we take a look at that? I mean, I think what you're suggesting, there's some, I understand what you're suggesting and saying, and certainly there's the example of somebody being employed by a provider agency bidding on a contract, right? We can say that that's not that raises a concern.
That's clear cut.
Right, and so you're getting into some grayer areas. I think what we might want to do before we go live on this, and I'll look to Mary Beth and our counsel's office team to take the lead on it. We can do a little bit of scenario planning, some what ifs and Q&A kind of things like that we can work out some of the details, in terms of these scenarios. I think that would be a sensible next step. Does that make sense to you, Mary?
Yes, the fact that it needs more discussion makes sense to me.
All right.
Can I ask a quick question? This is just a declaration. Like you're just putting it out there just so you know I want to be transparent. These are my connections. You're not necessarily saying, and I'll use myself as an example, that someone that works for a provider agency, which was a decision that I made a few years ago because my son was struggling so much, would not be eligible to also be recognized as a family member and advocate. You're not stating that, correct? You're just saying that that needs to be disclosed, and that when there is a direct interest involved, that I would need to recuse myself from a vote or from swaying any of my committee members for personal interest. You're not saying that I can't be a part of the process and bring my knowledge and expertise to the table, correct?
I'd have to defer to Mary Beth.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct.
Thank you, Mary Beth.
You're welcome.
Right, so you're an employee of an agency. You can't vote on a contract for your agency. Fair, right?
And I never ever have, nor would I. That's unethical.
Yeah, I wasn't asserting anything to the different, but to the contrary. But yeah, that's and the disclosure form is intended, I think, to inform to bring awareness so that somebody has front and center, and so that other members of the chair has information. Hey, wait a minute, person X, you probably shouldn't be in this discussion because you have an interest in the outcome.
May I also make a comment? Going back to something like Mary said, but and this is specifically when we review the proposals that come in, I would say probably every family member has an interest because they trust an agency because their own child was there. So, there's a lot of conflict that can happen that doesn't include money. So one of the things that we should discuss as well is how do, the Office of the State Comptroller years ago had a scoring form, and there were certain ways how you had to score and certain ways to see when there were skewed scores, like too high or too low. And, meant that somebody had a personal, either personal bias against the agency because the bulk would be in the middle. So we could talk about how to prevent that being swayed by maybe taking the highest and the lowest score sheets out to come to a average, because when we had to do the RFP, we had to come up with why and justify by using these scoring sheets. I don't know if you're familiar, if you got to that point yet.
I would have to defer to the regional office team. I don't know what kind of scoring sheet we've used or will use. I think that's probably a later in a fall kind of issue, but I don't know, Aviva, Alexis, or anybody else on that team has any insight on that.
Yeah, this is Abiba. Kathy, we'll follow up and look into that. I think, just given all the concerns that are raised, obviously more conversations need to occur. So we'll go back and take a look at that. The key is to make sure that we have consistency across the 19 councils. So we'll follow up.
If you can't find the last one I think we used, I do have it. Just want to take a look at it.
Can I just add?
Sorry.
Can I just add? This is Alia. I just wanted to add that I have done a lot of RFPs from Queens. This conflict of interest declaration is actually to double check the fact that if you have an RFP in front of you and you are reviewing, you are not connected with it in any way possible. Say, like, if your child is, if there is an RFP for Rainbow Agency and your child is there, he's been going to the day program or anything, whether it's FSS or respite program or any other thing, but the agency's name will be here, so the coordinator will see that if I am connected to that agency in any way or form, I cannot do the RFP. So the scoring and everything comes out as a fact that I cannot review it because there will, of course, be conflict of interest. I will either have great likeness for that agency or I would have some, unlikeness. So just to bring in that fact. And I don't think that affects being part of the FSS Council, but it does affect if you are one of the team members of a RFP. That's what my understanding is. And at the start of the RFP also, the team of DDRO, they do ask you, is anyone going to that to that agency or something? Thank you.
Thank you, Alia.
I respectfully disagree with you that you could eliminate the whole council. It doesn't make sense. As long as you're upfront about saying why you're saying.
Can't hear you, Mary.
I said that as long as you're upfront about it, yeah, I think that as long as you're not receiving any financial recompense from that agency, whatever information you might be able to bring to the committee is helpful. So, and you could also have 5 members on your RFP committee who use that agency. So I don't agree with you. That's all.
Well, it's not 5 members. The members are actually from the DDRO. It's only one. When I did the RFP, there used to be only one family member, and that family member has to be from the executive board of the FSS Council. So either a chairperson, vice chair, or a corresponding secretary, whatever the position is. And I see Ms. Judy Gleason is here, and I thank her very much because she made me part of that RFP, and I was the vice chair then. So it has basically what my understanding is and what I was told at that time, I think 2005 or something. It was just that you just have to declare. So like if my son is going to, just an example, a Rainbow Agency, and there is something about Rainbow Agency, it's come on the table as an RFP, I cannot be part of that. That's about it.
I still disagree, respectfully disagree.
Well,
our membership is comprised completely differently, and I bet if we all sat down at a table, everybody would have a different committee makeup, and maybe that's something that we want guidance on as well.
it sounds like a matter that's kind of specific to our organization. Since we're so close to the agencies we work with, our family is actually by design involved in those agencies. So there is some challenges with the standard, I think, conflict of interest declaration. It's clear that we, need to have some more discussions. In my mind, the thing that begins to occur to me is try to look at defining, what we consider to be personal gain, right? I mean, that might be something to kind of bring into that discussion to try to parse, where we need to go with this. But certainly, I think we can continue these discussions offline and try to arrive at a point where everybody's comfortable. Does that make sense, Roger?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, we wanted to kind of, introduce this topic because, how to do the RFPs hasn't been, when there hasn't been money for new RFPs, it's not a really relevant conversation to be talking about how to do them when, we've been in a situation where obviously there haven't been funds to allocate to new RFPs. Now that we have funds to allocate to new RFPs, the question would be both how do we, obviously allocate the monies as we discussed earlier, and then how do we then have a process that identifies community needs as well as complies with the relevant legal and ethical, issues. I guess more to come. And I don't know, I've lost track to some degree of the agenda. Maybe Chris, you're doing a better job than I am of tracking the agenda items, but I don't know what's next.
I'm watching. I'm getting ready to move on. I just want to kind of do a quick review in my head of what just went down here. We talked about reinstituting the RFP process, getting that process rolling again, and a commitment to doing that. We are looking at a number of like $3.5 million annually that's going to be dispersed in the best way that you have to do it now based on the data that you have, and we'll take a look at what that looks like, and I'm sure have some discussions about that going forward. As far as contracts between Kevin's analysis and now, I know there's programs that have closed or are closing or intending to close and will be ongoingly. Will those funds also become available to re-RFP? Are we like fully back in action once we get into compliance with the COI and such?
Our anticipation is that, and Kevin, please correct me if I'm wrong, but our anticipation is if you look at last year's baseline spending on FSS program, that we are doing a net increase of $3.5 million that will be continued year to year. So in the event that, let's say, $1 million of spending were to diminish, we would be looking to re-spend that, to keep. I hesitate to use the word reallocate because that goes into the conversation we just had for 40 minutes. But that this represents a new baseline spending on the program. And, I think there's probably some conversations to be had over time about, maximizing the efficacy of the program, making sure that the funds are being used in a way that most benefit families in need, et cetera, et cetera. And that's partly the kind of that goes into kind of the 507 question, because that's more of a vision and goal question than a mechanics question. But this is a net increase to the base spending on the Family Support Services program. Kevin, yes. Have I overstepped? I hope I haven't made new policy here.
Roger, you never overstep, so whatever you say is perfectly accurate.
You can't overstep.
But was it in fact perfectly accurate? I guess the question.
Yeah, we talked about like maintaining a status quo, right? So, this $3.5 million is for funds that were previously not available, and if there was other stuff that happens, throughout the year. Again, I think in the past, we used to wait till there was a critical priority. Like if we're talking about $100,000, it may be more expensive from a staff effort to re-procure, but, we can look at the timing and dollar value, Chris and company, about what we see, and have seen, since April 1st to see if that's something that we can look to preserve is the question, right?
Right. Yeah, that's. I think that the term that I would use for those funds as programs reduce or close is reemploy. Can we reemploy those funds? Right?
Yep. Yep. So I would say what Roger said is accurate.
Right.
And I would just caveat it, of course, there's the year-to-year budgeting. So, there may be increases or decreases as we've seen, in allocations to the agency. But, our anticipation based upon where we sit today is that this is a net $3.5 million increase over baseline spending from last year.
Okay, very good. So the next item on the agenda is a central office update regarding some first impressions, I'm assuming, on the family reimbursement ADM implementation.
Chris, actually, before we get to that, there was more with this topic.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Mary Beth, no, that's okay. She had a couple more slides to cover.
Okay, cool.
And these are draft bylaws. Chris and I have had conversations, and I understand that this is something that may be more of a topic for your September meeting. It just asks that people start to look through them. If we could have the next slide. Again, they're drafts. Sorry, I don't know who has the slides. We have the next slide. I'm sorry, I'm not who's in charge of those. There we go. So anyway, these are drafts. As you can see, the highlighted line, that's just talking about, and that's up to the committee as to how you want your committee members' terms to be. The balance of that article is pretty much taken directly from your statutory language. For the next slide, please. So, and this is, again, this is to be determined. It's just a placeholder talking about who the chair would be. You may feel you need other officers, a vice chair, whatever. That would go there. Can we have the next slide, please? Again, this is pretty much directly from your statutory language in Mental Hygiene Law, Section 4143, talking about the duties of the committee. We have the next slide, please. This talks about the local advisory councils, the 19 local councils, who it's made up of, and their duties as well. We have the next slide. This is regarding the meetings of the statewide committee. I would suggest that we add a sentence or two now that we've passed the resolution and policy for video conferencing. That probably should be included in there, and I'll work on drafting something for you there. The next article, please, the next slide. This again deals with what we just spoke about regarding public officers law and the Ethics Commission, their requirements on conflict of interest for per diem officers. Same thing on the next slide, please. Just a continuation of what we've already discussed. And the last slide. And this again just is an article that allows for amendments to your bylaws to add or make changes as things occur over the course of the committee's work. Again, these are drafts. They are not set in stone, so this is a good opportunity if there's a different and additional articles that you feel need to be included in the bylaws. Happy to put those together. You're ready to discuss those as a committee. I'm happy to help.
And Mary
Thanks,
Beth, just to kind of frame it, we put together sort of a framework for the elements that are sort of the bare minimum of a bylaws in some areas where decision making may want to occur amongst the committee, and then we would kind of look to your meeting and discussion, perhaps internally, perhaps now, to kind of get to a point where we're, where we have something that's adoptable.
Mary Beth,
I just have a quick question.
Go ahead.
So Mary Beth, since we don't have bylaws at the committee level, and committees mostly don't have bylaws, so the council have to adopt this few pages which you have mentioned into the bylaws of the local FSS council.
I'm sorry, I'm not following your question.
Committee.
Yeah, I think Leah, I think I understand your question. I think what we're looking for is the FSS statewide committee would adopt the bylaws that would be governing the FSS statewide committee. And then sort of the next phase would be looking at local committees, because, you know, the importance of a bylaw, right, exists for if there's certain obligations that somebody has as a member of one of these committees, this is a way of everybody understanding and knowing what those are. And then some of the processes and standards around how is the chair named, which, you know, there's nothing particularly in the law that says, but it's important to have some procedure. As folks will recall, you know, we had a new chair, and welcome Chris, but we didn't have any defined procedures for selecting a chair, which was not, you know, the best scenario. So those kinds of scenarios can be thought of ahead of time, put in bylaws. So the idea would be FSS statewide committee, and then we use that as a framework for local committees.
Great. Tina, your hand is up.
Chris, I was just wondering, can we do this as a separate meeting? Because I think there's some things in there that we need to talk about as a committee. And add these things in, and some things need to be changed and tweaked. I don't think it's a final thing, so maybe we can do that separately, because there's a lot we need to talk about with that.
Right. I've talked about that with Mary Beth previously, and I'm not intending to try to settle this today. Time does not allow. There's certain discussions that we need to have, and we'll have those discussions. We'll come up with a document we're comfortable with as a committee, and we'll get the work done. But yeah, not today. Gail, your hand is up.
I just wanted to clarify what was highlighted a few slides back and make sure I understood it. I didn't understand if the maximum time these are stating someone can serve on this committee is 6 years or 6 consecutive years.
I believe, Mary Beth, those are items that we can talk about and change as a committee.
Yeah, so it's something where you know, and Chris, I know you serve on the DDAC as well, so you're familiar with their bylaws, and so what we're trying to do is simply give a framework, you know, for the bylaws, and typically there are, for example, terms in bylaws, right? So that, you know, some turnover, and it's healthy usually. You know, how long can somebody serve as a chair? There's nothing that says that there's a magic answer to that. So what we're giving you is sort of a framework saying, hey, we need to do this. You know, you can't, there's certain things that are not changeable because they may be in the statute. You know, they may be something that's just the law, right? The public officer's law applies whether you want it to or not, right? That's part of the law. But certain other things are open to sort of your discussion. So I think the concept is, you know, take it together, take a framework. Chris, you have the DDAC bylaws, or you should, as a member of that. You can share what's in there, you know, to the degree to which there's some differences or some changes and suggestions. We can have some discussions via email or through a separate discussion, and then we'd come back into open meeting, and y'all would be presumably proposing and adopting these bylaws as the bylaws that govern your activities.
Great, thanks, Ron. Okay, looks like we are ready to now move on to the central office update on the FRADM implementation.
Thanks, Chris. Next slide, please. Thank you. So most folks are probably aware, I know we have some new people on today likely, so just to give a bit of background, the Family Reimbursement ADM was issued in March with a go-live date of July 1st of this year. What's happened since that go-live, we have been able to train care managers, providers, and stakeholders on this ADM prior to it going live. Some updates have occurred actually to the website as additional resources since we have last spoken. The survey that was created in collaboration with the statewide committee was formally attached to the ADM, and that is posted on the website as a resource. We are also in the process of translating the family reimbursement application, the RECIT verification form, and the survey into the 12 common languages spoken and written and read in New York. We are also continuing to review items that are not listed on the ADM, and we're working with the RO on what those future amended lists will look like in terms of what's allowable and what's not allowable. So I think we talked about this last meeting, but really, you know, we have the list of things that are allowable and not allowable. We know that that's not a comprehensive list. So what we're trying to do is keep tabs on anything that falls out of that ADM and try to find a realistic time frame for us to add to that formal list so that everybody is aware of what has been approved and what is, again, kind of adding to the not allowable items as those come up. So we are working with the RO so that that list is consistently implemented across the state. And we can talk more about how we communicate that through this forum, because obviously we're not going to, you know, update the ADM monthly. That's just not a realistic task to be done, but we can at least make sure that everybody is aware of that growing or changing list as changes come in. What we're also doing is really working with the ROs as any questions or scenarios pop up that are from providers or family members. What we can say as of right now, because, you know, the ADM has only been live since July 1st, so not a lot of time to get any trends or whatnot, but some questions that have come up consistently is about the process for submitting the reimbursement. We've got a lot of people asking, are they allowed to submit multiple reimbursement requests, or does it have to be all at once? So we have responded. You absolutely can have multiple applications. It's what the amount is up to. So we don't expect that, you know, families would be submitting for all of that at once. That there may be situations that come up where you submit those applications as the reimbursement is being requested. And the other common question that we have been answering is about the life plan and mentioning FSS in the life plan and what that looks like. So we have been working with the care managers to make sure that they're very clear about that process. So that's the update on the ADM itself. I was going to touch on the brochure, but Chris, did anybody have any questions about the ADM?
I believe, Gail, you may have some questions on that.
Yeah, I gathered a few from different families and individuals and stakeholders that I would love to share. Some folks were interested in hearing about any feedback that you have received from families, reactions and responses to the changes. Are you getting feedback directly from families?
So we are working with the regional offices to collect that feedback. We meet with the ROs monthly. So if you want to talk through the feedback that we've received, we can be prepared for that at a future meeting, but I don't have that on hand right now.
Okay, and it was a similar question from feedback from DDRO staff and providers as well.
Yep, so the RO staff helped us create the policy. But in terms of feedback from providers and family members, that is all what we discussed on our monthly meeting. So happy to have another conversation about that at a future meeting.
Okay, yeah, and the question around DDRO staff was, how did this impact their roles, and are they seeing this as being, you know, efficient way to do things?
Thank you for that clarification.
The next question was, do you anticipate any significant changes other than obviously the approvable item list that you already mentioned? Do you anticipate any changes to the ADM? If so, what, and any timeline available?
So at this point, I don't think we're anticipating any changes since it just went live on 7/1. I think we can absolutely have a conversation as feedback comes in. You know, we need some time for the ADM to actually shake itself out, come to true form, see what implementation looks like, and then we'll have more real-time feedback, right? Because it's based on the experiences that the families and the providers are kind of seeing as a result of the ADM. So I think we're absolutely open to continuing that feedback to funnel through the regional office. Like I said, we meet on a regular basis. So keep that feedback coming, and we can absolutely have a conversation about what to do with that feedback and what the next steps would be.
And then the next 3 questions are a little more specific and requesting clarification around some of the ADM and the intent. So on the ADM in page 3, number B2, it states that the question was, can you please further define a non-paid paid caregivers? It does say that number 2 is reside with one or more non-paid family member. And the question was can you further define what that means? And what the intent was.
Yeah, so, and I know that there's probably a lot of people who have questions right now. So if there are any questions that we don't get to today and you want to have some additional clarification, please funnel those through your RO. We are keeping track of the questions coming in. So in terms of a non-paid caregiver or family member, that's somebody who's not being paid to provide supports to the loved one. So I'm not sure how else to explain that. Does that make sense, or am I making things more confusing? I thought it was pretty direct.
Yeah, I think you and I specifically talked about this particular one, and it has come up a number of times, at least in our region, where we've had a family member that does work for, like, for example, the CDPAP program, and respite and those services are very, very different. So they're really struggling to understand why, if they have a job providing supports to their child, because there's so little staffing supports available currently, why they would be restricted from getting respite care when they probably need it more than the other guy, since they're, providing that care themselves and unable to work outside of the home during those hours. So it was really around that particular one, which has come up a number of times.
Okay, got it. That makes sense. So just to clarify, they're not restricted from getting respite. There's nothing stopping somebody who's a paid family member from accessing respite through the waiver, just to clarify that. So it sounds like the question is, why are we not allowing paid family members to qualify for family reimbursement? Is that the question?
Yes, but what you just said sounded like what you just said it wasn't, so I got lost. I'm very sorry.
Sorry, so what was the question, Gail?
For example, if someone is employed by CDPAP to provide services to their own child, you just said they're not restricted from receiving respite reimbursement. There seems to be an intent
I'm sorry,
around
Gail.
that. Oh, I'm
Got
sorry.
it. Sorry. I know where the confusion is. So I didn't say that they're not restricted from receiving reimbursement. They can receive respite through the waiver. You're correct. Somebody who is providing CDPAP to their loved one and getting paid for that, they wouldn't qualify for family reimbursement. That's correct.
And the question around that was intent. So,
yeah, so the intent is that family reimbursement is an extremely limited resource that is 100% state paid. So we have to focus on folks who need to access this resource. I totally understand that you're telling me there are people who get paid to support their loved ones and they need this resource. There are also people who aren't getting paid to support their loved one and also need this resource. So it was one of those things that we had to take a look at the eligibility criteria and be very formal with that process because it's a limited resource. So, there's not a way to capture everyone who needs this resource, which is unfortunate. We probably didn't realize we were going to be in this staffing crisis for as long as we have been, but at the end of the day, it is a limited resource. So this is really meant to target those who are not getting paid to support their loved ones. I absolutely understand the kind of decision, or, I'm not a family member who has had to make this decision, but I understand based on the feedback that family members have shared with me, they have had to make a difficult decision to not work and support their loved one. And I absolutely hear that. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, we had to make a policy that was targeted in intent. So that's what we had to do.
What is acceptable as verification that the individual resides with a non-paid family member or non-paid caregiver? I think some providers are getting tripped up on verification.
Yeah, I think we
Most
can
people
talk
wouldn't
more about. Yeah, absolutely. I think we can talk more about that because I think it's a collaborative discussion with the care manager and the providers, because we all have a part here in making sure that we have that documentation. So thank you for raising that. I'm writing it down for something that we can follow up on.
The next question is provider-based. It's not family-based, and it was around the NOD. Apparently, these documents are old and not always available. Some providers don't even have access to them. The question was, is there something that they can use instead of an NOD? We recently had a request from a DDRO that went to the provider to ask the family for the NOD, and they had qualified for eligibility over 12 years ago, so they didn't have it. So the question is, what is available if a family doesn't have an NOD and that's not available through a provider agency or the DDRO?
That's a great question. I don't have an answer for you right now.
This is Abiba. Alexis, can you hear me? Gail, we certainly have to follow up on that because the DDRO staff have access to tabs, so we are able to confirm whether or not someone has eligibility. So if you can just push that question in and just let us know, where it came from, we'll certainly follow it through and add that in the follow-up that Alexis mentioned.
Push that question in? Do you mean send you an email?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
No, I just want to make sure I understood.
That.
Certainly,
Yep,
I'd be happy to. No, that's fine. I'd be happy to send you an email about that. And that would be really helpful for review because that was really kind of the next question where it's like the DDRO is doing the final approval. So is that piece really required if the provider knows they are eligible? So it sounds like we're talking the same language. So I will send an email about that for follow-up. Thank you. And the last one is notifying the family. On page 6, number 3, the ADM states, once the FSS provider approves or denies the application, they must give written notice to the individual family and care manager. So the question was really about, that's fine, but what about when the DDRO or central office is the one to make the final determination that a request is denied? It's damaging the relationships between the families and care managers and providers. Can there be anything done about that to communicate where the denial occurred so that families can continue to have trust in provider agencies?
Thanks, Gail. We can definitely bring that back. I think the intent is really for that to fall on the provider as the agency that's providing the reimbursement. I understand what you're speaking to about that causing a strain. We can definitely bring that back. Thank you.
Thank you. We look forward to further updates and developments and the list being extended and learning more about how we can continue to help families with these funds. So thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
Thanks, Gail. We're coming up to the end of our time here. We've got about 8 minutes left. Kathy, I see your hand is up. Is that in regard to this question?
It's in regard to the ADM, yes. I knew this was going to be on the agenda, so I called a couple of our providers to ask how things were going. One provider that serves multiple boroughs, including the one I'm in on Staten Island, and the majority of their applications are coming from care managers, and 80% to 85% of those applications, they're all using the old application. Yeah. So I mean, I don't have a solution. You guys could think this out, but I noticed in the comments section that Ed O'Donnell also said that care managers simply didn't participate in the trainings. I don't know how you're going to get through to the care managers, but I think more information training would be helpful. But I also think maybe I had suggested this to our local people, DDR people, when they gave our family support a little overview about it, to have a family session, because you could even see like people are commenting in the chat. They don't know. So if they don't know, because there are certain things, one family member I spoke to said, and I'm not familiar with this, I didn't pull out my son's life plan, but in section 5 of the life plan, where it states that they have to have, I think you mentioned that family support in the life plan, but it also says you have to put the agency. So the family I was talking to put it on one agency, but wanted to send it to another one. How's that going to play out? Even, if they just change their mind and say, I'm going to go here and not there, I don't understand why the agency has to be listed. And I don't know, again, I didn't pull it out to look, but that's causing a little confusion for the family members as well.
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate the feedback about the care management perspective. We obviously have some great connections internally with our care management team, so we will make sure that we can reiterate that training at the care management level. That is good feedback about the life plan. I think in the past it has been extremely generic and doesn't have any detail about what component of FSS that families are seeking. Like, I'm talking even the detail as general as family reimbursement, period. You know what I mean? I'm not even talking about the minutia of what the family is seeking reimbursement for. So I think it's a big ship to turn here to get that kind of corrected, but we will make sure to follow up with the CCO team about especially the application. That's a bit concerning. So I appreciate you raising that.
Maybe, like you said, you just started this not even 2 months ago, but I wouldn't let it go too far, maybe 3 months. Maybe it would be a good idea to come together with the providers separately to see what their problems are. So on that end, if there are problems that can be fixed, then it'll make everybody's life easier. And maybe separate stakeholder meetings, including your DDROs, what problems they're having.
Yeah, so we have regular meetings with our RO staff already where we are getting feedback. So I don't think we would even have to wait 3 months to get feedback. There is already a process in place where providers provide their feedback to the RO. It does get to us. Families provide their feedback to the provider, to the RO. So I think to the extent where people don't realize they can do that, that would be really appreciated. I don't think we would have to even wait for a formal type of feedback session. There's already an established ability to get that feedback in real time. So, please keep encouraging folks to share their feedback with the process. With the ADM, it's pretty impossible for us to know what's happening without that feedback and to even know what types of changes would be needed, if any. It's difficult to know what the barriers are if they're not kind of shared through the RO and through the provider. So I would encourage folks to just keep doing that, and we can revisit the policy when we receive that feedback.
Great. Thanks so much, Alexis, for that presentation and for your feedback on that. And great. We're coming up on the end of our time here. There's still 2 items on the agenda. As far as a statewide committee update, I don't have anything that we've been working on per se that's new. We have been very focused on understanding better the ADM, on getting the RFP process established, on getting FSS written into the 507 plan. We have been, getting together, having discussions, working behind the scenes, communicating directly with OPW, and trying to move that agenda of supporting families directly through family support services to keep that moving forward. And the committee is committed to continuing that work. Our final item is next steps. And Roger, would that be something you can hit real quick?
100%, Chris. So I think the next steps here are not just in the order that they're in my mind. I'm not ranking them in importance. One would be to have those discussions and I think get some bylaws and the conflict of interest stuff, kind of squared away. on a statewide committee, and then kind of push that out to the local committees. Really important to getting that done will be we want to really have that in place before we're before we're issuing the RFP, so that we make sure that we're legally compliant there. The second is we're going to get you some additional information about the the way the numbers break down, I guess. This is the best way I'll put it, in terms of the $3.5 million and the regional allocations there. And then the third component would be, as we're looking at that, and I think the regional offices are going to be needing to engage those local committees probably as the numbers are known. So that's probably a little bit later to be able to be beginning that work on identifying what those identified regional needs are. Because there's a scoping exercise to get the RFPs put together. And then it sounds like number 4, just on the conversation that has just happened, would be some feedback loop in terms of the actual ADM. And to Alexis's point, we're not looking to do monthly updates, right? But we're when we have enough kind of information that tells us how's it going. And it sounds like relatedly, we're going to need to loop back, and we have a team that oversees the care management function in the agency that we would need to engage with. And there's regular training and engagements. And it sounds like if an 80% error rate is if that's replicated throughout the state, that's not great. So we need to do better there. So I think it sounds like some training and education and just some reinforcement activities over there are probably appropriate. How'd I do, Chris? A 45-second summary.
You got him in. You did good.
That's fantabulous. All right, so I think we are at the 4 o'clock hour, respecting that it is in fact a Friday, and we will either see each other in person, some of us, or again virtually. I guess that's dependent upon a thing that's unknown as to whether there is a public health emergency that is continued. We will continue the communications. Chris, I really appreciate you at the front end acknowledging Josie. I'd like to acknowledge her as well. She's the person who makes this all happen, and does so with grace. So thank you to Josie, and we will wish each other a wonderful rest of your day and happy weekend, everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.